The United States has announced the launch of the second phase of President Trump's ceasefire plan for Gaza. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff has posted on X that Phase 2 establishes a transitional Technocratic Palestinian administration, which will be known as the National Committee for the Administration of Gaza. He also says Phase 2 begins the full demilitarization and reconstruction of Gaza, primarily the disarmament of all unauthorized personnel. He adds the U.S. expects Hamas to comply fully with its obligations, including the immediate return of the final deceased hostage, and warns failure to do so will bring serious consequences. All right, Patty Culhane joins us now live from Washington, D.C. Patty, good to speak with you again. Let me just ask if we've heard anything else yet from the administration with regard to this announcement from Steve Witkoff about Phase 2 of the Gaza ceasefire deal.
No, and this is, as you mentioned, a social media post, which is missing some very key information, such as what is Israel going to have to do in this next phase. It was expected that they would withdraw further back from the yellow line. Not any mention of that in here. Talks about Hamas must disarm or face consequences. We know that the plan had called for setting up basically 3 different zones inside Gaza, allowing for some redevelopment in the first zone, but not in the most densely packed areas of the Gaza Strip. We also know the first phase, Israel was expected to dramatically increase the humanitarian aid into Gaza. We have seen repeatedly UN officials, NGOs say that Israel's denying key things that people in Gaza need to survive the winter, such as tents, saying that they could be used as weapons. So this, again, is very much in line with what we've seen from the Trump administration, where it tends to favor Israel in these negotiations, but they are saying they're moving to the second phase. So what could that look like? Well, Reuters is reporting that there'll be a 15-member technocratic group of Palestinians that will run the Strip on a day-to-day basis. Also not mentioned in this statement is the fact that it calls for an international security force made up of foreign soldiers to go in and maintain the peace. Hamas has rejected that idea, so that could lead to confrontation. We don't know if any of the countries that they've been talking to are going to send their soldiers into Gaza, exactly what that structure would look like. So this statement says they're moving forward, but it doesn't exactly spell out what that's going to look like, other than the president believes that it's the next phase is ready to move on to what he says he's done is brought peace to the Middle East. But saying that and proving it on the ground, those are right now 2 very different things.
All right, Patty, please stand by for us. We'll come back to you in just a minute. I want to go now to Tariq Abu Azoum, our correspondent in Gaza City, who's on the phone with us. Tariq, this statement, even though there's not a lot of detail, it does mention that Phase 2 will begin the full demilitarization and reconstruction of Gaza, primarily the disarmament of all unauthorized personnel. And it says that the U.S. expects Hamas to comply fully with its obligations. Have you heard anything new from Hamas when it comes to this announcement from Special Envoy Steve Witkoff?
Well, Hamas has not yet issued any statements regarding the American announcement, but it has been facing a growing pressure from key regional mediators and the U.S. administration to adhere to the terms of the agreement and to accelerate the process of its demilitarization. But Hamas might view this announcement as a transition from a ceasefire phase to what the U.S. frames as longer-term stabilization efforts in Gaza build around security arrangements, temporary governance, as what has been mentioned in the plan, and reconstruction. But the focus on demilitarization here places security at the center of this phase, while the proposed technocratic administration led by Palestinian figures is only responsible to manage day-to-day affairs during the transitional period, though its structure, authority, and even relationship to existing Palestinian institution, Mohammed, remain unclear. Maybe this will help to abandon much of responsibility regarding local governance or from Hamas's shoulder, but Hamas will be quite cornered this time regarding its demilitarization, which means here that regional mediators, particularly Egypt, Qatar and Turkey, are likely to remain central, not only in maintaining the ceasefire, but also in facilitating governance arrangements and coordinating international reconstruction support. But at the same time, the durability here of the ceasefire itself remains a key variable. Like any deterioration could delay or even ruin these plans. So the whole equation right now is quite hinged on the level of commitment that will be not only shown by Hamas in Gaza, but also by the Israeli side, given the previous rounds of accusations exchanged between both sides regarding the commitment to the terms of the first phase of the ceasefire agreement. But much will depend on implementation at this phase, like demilitarisation, governance reform, and large-scale reconstruction would need to proceed simultaneously in Gaza, a territory that has been incredibly facing extensive destruction and humanitarian strain. So that here raises practical questions about not only sequencing, but also regarding verification, funding, and who will oversee such component on the ground. Now, Hamas possibly will be negotiating this with mediators regarding how the militarization will go and how the reconstruction as well will take place in Gaza, given the previous parameters of the first phase of the agreement that has been not successfully met by the Israeli side, Mohammed.
You mentioned how the implementation of all this is going to be key. I want to ask you about one specific part in all of this when it comes to phase two, which is going to be the establishment of a transitional technocratic Palestinian administration. At least that's what the statement from Steve Witkoff says, and that's what was expected going into the potential of any kind of announcement when it comes to phase two. We know that that's been a sticking point for a long time. From what you've seen in Gaza, what you've heard from officials there and people on the ground, are we any closer to being able to establish some kind of transitional technocratic Palestinian administration that would be acceptable to people and officials in Gaza?
Well, there has been a general consensus among Palestinians that Palestinian figures must be responsible of managing day-to-day life in Gaza. They were refusing fundamentally the idea of having a foreign-led technocratic government to be completely running the whole life in the Strip. And that has been the main testimonies that we have heard from local families in Gaza. They say that they accept any governing Palestinian body that will be responsible on facilitating day-to-day life issues, including also the restoration of previous civilian services, including education, health, and even economic issues. But here, they are quite skeptical about whether this even a new Palestinian technocratic government would face some strains from the Israeli side, or there will be further Israeli obstacles or spanners thrown over the whole process. So this has been one of the main fears that has been locally shared by Palestinians. They say that Israel is still dictating the dynamics of the ceasefire regarding what comes into Gaza and what comes out of it. And one of the main fears also that had been circulating amongst Palestinians on the ground is that to what extent this new governing body will be given some sort of concessions to fulfill its commitments on the ground. As you understand that Israel's war in Gaza over the past 2 years has destroyed massively all governing infrastructure in the Strip regarding police stations, universities, hospitals, and civilian infrastructure. So they are facing huge responsibility now to facilitate all of this. And one of the main aspects that people are looking forward is the reconstruction process, and that is absolutely linked to the Israeli side and to what level Israel will allow for the reconstruction materials to access the Strip. So here there is a remarkable sense of cautious optimism, but that has been quite marked with previous failures regarding fulfilling the terms of the agreement when it comes to the Israeli side. But in general, there is a full consensus among Palestinians that only Palestinians should have the lead regarding governing Gaza and facilitating all suspending and critical issues that had been widely complicated over the past 2 years.
Tariq, we'll leave it there for now. We'll come back to you as more details emerge in the coming hours. For now, that's Al Jazeera's Tariq Abu Azoum from Gaza City. Thanks so much. Let's go back to Patty Culhane joining us once again from Washington, D.C. Patty, I want to ask you about if we're expecting any announcements when it comes to this idea of a board of peace. For a couple of months now, at least, we've heard from Donald Trump and other members of the administration that not only would phase 2 be happening at some point, but also that there would be a board of peace that would be overseeing what was going on in Gaza, that would be announced. Any indications that we'll get any more information about that in the hours to come?
Well, we do know that U.S. President Donald Trump has some sort of bill signing or executive order signing in a couple of hours, and it is expected that he might take questions. He tends to do that. He has been very much focused on this, what he calls the Board of Peace. Just recently, he had said that he would be president of this Board of Peace, and then just a couple days ago said that it would be the 12-member board would be made up of the most important leaders and the most important nations. So not exactly clear what that means. So I think what they're envisioning is this Board of Peace will be overseeing this technocratic government. The Reuters and Wall Street Journals reporting that it could be a 14 or 15-member panel of people, many of them tied to the Palestinian Authority, that would run the day-to-day operations. Again, now that I've had a chance to read the statement, because it is, again, breaking news, one thing that I think is very important, towards the end of the statement, Witkoff writes that Phase 1 delivered historic humanitarian aid, maintained the ceasefire, and returned the captives, all but the bodies of one. Let's take that step by step. Delivered historic humanitarian aid. I think people on the ground and NGOs, the UN would disagree with that characterization. Maintained the ceasefire. Hundreds of Gazans, Palestinians have still been being killed since that ceasefire. Israel is still operating, conducting operations in the zones past the lines where they were supposed to pull back from. So that said, when Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu flew down to Florida, Donald Trump was asked about Israel and their actions to the ceasefire, and he said that Israel's lived up to the plan 100%. So one of the things that's missing, there's a lot of things that are missing from this very broad social media statement, is that international stabilization force. That is a key element. So they've announced that there's going to be a technocratic government that Hamas must disarm or there will be consequences. But as far as the international stabilization force, they had painted it before as countries in the region sending their troops in to maintain stability in Gaza. Not at all clear that they have that force ready to go or exactly who would be part of it. And it also talks about Israeli troops pulling back from the so-called yellow line. There's no mention of that in this statement. So they are basing this on, they believe that the Phase 1 is complete and that humanitarian aid has been delivered, the ceasefire is holding. That is not the case on the ground. So it's not clear how this new phase is going to be implemented when they're not actually acknowledging that there have been problems with Phase 1.
All right, that's Al Jazeera's Patty Culhane joining us live from Washington, D.C. Thanks for unpacking all that for us, Patty. Let's get more now from Nida Ibrahim, who's joining us on the phone from Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. Nida, we know it's been a very difficult road to get to this point. Obviously, there's still a lot of questions as to what will happen next when it comes to the announcement that Phase 2 will begin. I want to ask you about the fact that in Steve Witkoff's announcement, he says that a transitional technocratic Palestinian administration has essentially been established or will be established when Phase 2 happens. Do we know any more from Palestinian officials with regard to all of this?
Well, we know that the Palestinian Vice President Hussein Sheikh has congratulated this move before the announcement came from Steve Witkoff, showing that the Palestinian Authority is on board with what's happening in Gaza. When we talk about that, this is a very sensitive issue. The Palestinian Authority had always wanted a bigger role, a more crucial one that represents the political aspirations and not just the humanitarian and technical needs of the besieged Gaza Strip. But it seems under the current circumstances, what the Palestinian Authority is getting is some sort of Palestinian technocrats who are known to be close to Fatah, that is leading the Palestinian Authority, and not those who have political, let's say, careers. When we talk about this committee of 15 technocrats, we are talking about someone who previously was a Palestinian minister, who is being fronted and who is the main leading person of that committee. And he has been someone who was involved in a technical aspect, an executive who's been designing, let's say, infrastructure and cities. This is why he's being chosen for that place. This particular issue is irking many Palestinians in the Palestinian national movement. Why? Because they believe the Palestinian cause has a political inclination, has other aspects that Palestinians are looking forward to when it comes to getting their own sovereignty and independence and getting freedom from Israel's occupation. So all of that is being seen as a Palestinian life being decided by a group of technocrats, being led by a board of peace whose members are yet to be announced. But we know the name Nikolai Lednov has been surfacing as per sources to be the leading figure or the high representative of the Board of Peace, basically a channel between the Technocratic committee and the Board of Peace. All of these questions, Palestinians would tell you, are being unanswered. The fact that their future is being decided without them is something that is of worry, but at the same time, you have people in Gaza who have been undergoing the difficult conditions, bombing for 2 years, who are looking forward to some relief, some sort of better life conditions, but many would tell you they don't want that to happen at the expense of a political aspiration for independence.
Nida, let me ask you about some of the sticking points, how difficult it was getting to this point, and what's the expectation as far as how difficult it will be to implement all this? As we've seen so often since October 7th, 2023, there have been times when announcements have been made when it comes to ceasefires, when it comes to expectations, and it takes a lot longer to implement these aspirations than many officials, especially in the U.S., would like. What's the expectation now as far as how difficult this may be, how many challenges there may be in the road ahead?
Well, there are many challenges. First of all, you have Israel, who has been postponing this phase, saying that they wanted the last hostage to be found and handed over from Gaza. And that's one of the problems that the Israeli public has been pushing, also Netanyahu, including the family of the Israelis who have been in Gaza taken as hostages by Hamas, asking him not to accept going to this phase. But as we've been saying, there's nothing being announced by the Americans yet when it comes to the Israeli withdrawal from the yellow line, further back to what we know as mentioned by the Trump plan as further withdrawal. So this is an issue that has not been addressed. You have also the Israeli insistence on demilitarization of Hamas, again, a word that we've also seen in Steve Witkoff's announcement today. But as far as Hamas members were saying, they do not want to disarm, they don't want to hand over their weapons, although they talk about some sort of freezing military activities against Israel. So we have some sort of disagreement, let's put it this way, when it comes to what's going to happen to Hamas's weapons, specifically the ones that Hamas members say are needed for people to prevent themselves from revenge, some sort of self-defense. So that's also another angle. The Rafah border crossing is also another sticking point because Israel has been delaying that opening of the border, citing different reasons and different accusations to the Palestinians who are not capable of conducting the opening and reopening of the border. That's something that has been mentioned in the Trump peace plan, and today we're hearing U.S. officials telling Al Jazeera that the reopening of Rafah is an Israeli issue. So that also is another sticking point that we need to be looking at.
All right, that's Al Jazeera's Nida Ibrahim joining us from Ramallah in the occupied West Bank. Thanks so much, Nida.
Don't miss out. Get the full picture. Subscribe to Al Jazeera for reliable news and expert insights. Like, share, stay ahead.